Hey everyone, it's Bergeron, and we're going to do a real simple still life today. It's going to be real easy to follow along, real easy to see what it is that we're doing. So please get your paints and set up a piece of paper, and we're going to get right into it. So this is a picture of the still life that I'm looking at. It's a real simple white cup that's a really large white cup, and a small blue teapot sitting on a white plate. All right, that's it. It's real simple. This is going to be an easy thing to follow along with. But before I get started, I want to do a thumbnail sketch. And I want you to do a thumbnail sketch. So here's the picture again. All right. So we're going to look at the picture. You can pause that if you want, but we're going to do a rectangle on our sketchbook. All right. This is how I plan on orienting the page. I plan on orienting it landscape. If it was, up and down like this is portrait, side to side like this is landscape. All right. So we're setting it up landscape because that's how best this teapot and cup is going to fit on there. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cup here, and this cup is kind of a bit of a weird shape, but I'm going to put the cup like this, and then the handle is coming off like that, and then I'm going to put the teapot, which is kind of a rectangular, tall rectangular teapot with some curves on it. All right. And it's got a lid that kind of comes up like this. That's got a little knob on the top. And there's this, and then there's a handle that comes out here. Handles are hard sometimes. This one's no exception. And then it's got a spout that comes out, and I can only really see part of the spout. All right. And then all of this is sitting on a plate. So if you haven't watched my video about drawing an ellipse or drawing a cylinder, you should probably go and check that out, because you'll see how to draw, this sort of a shape, or this one to get the cup and everything correct. So what's the problem with this? Well, there's a couple of problems with this. If we use the rule of thirds and we look at, here's 1/3, here's another third, here's another third, and here's another third. This here is sort of very blank and very vacant. All right. This is not too bad of a interesting shape, and there's some interesting space between these two objects, but really it's not big enough. All right. It's about 50% the size that it should be. This should actually be significantly larger than this. All right. So if you remember, one of the acronyms that I use quite often is FTE. And that T didn't turn out very well, but FTE. Focus, thumbnail, edit. All right. So I focused on these three objects, and I did a thumbnail, and now I'm going to edit them. All right. So here we go. I'm just going to draw another rectangle in landscape position, and I'm going to make my cup significantly bigger this time. I'm going to make my cup about that big. And I'm going to make the sides of it, the bottom of it, make it kind of curve down in there like this. My handle. All right. And then the teapot is about here. It's got kind of a rounded side on it, a rounded back on it. It's got a little knob up here. And then it's got a spout. And the spout is something like that. And all of this sits on a plate. All right. And there's a handle for this teapot. All right, that's a little bit better. I wish it was sort of slanted over a little bit more, or slid over a little bit more, so that this was on the page. So you see how I've adjusted my thumbnail sketch. I've repositioned where my drawing is going to end and begin. And now what we have is we do thirds, and we do thirds, and we do thirds. And you'll see that this cup is on a 1/3 line. The teapot is directly on a 1/3 line. And the whole plate is now, I'm using this outside edge here. The whole plate now is on the, in the painting. Not that the whole plate has to be on the painting. Lots of times I want people to run stuff right off the page. But for this instance, we're going to go with this thumbnail. So we're going to go with this side, so we can put a little check mark there, say this is how far we're going over, and this is how far we're going over. We like where the 1/3 lines are. All right, let's get at it. So I'm going to just set this just in front of me here. And again, I'll show you another picture of the still life that we're looking at. All right, so this is the still life. Okay, so now I have to transfer this onto my drawing. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to look at this drawing, my original still life, the real life object, this thing, this thumbnail sketch, and I'm going to figure out how is it I'm going to place this onto here. Well, one of the ways that I'm going to place it onto here is I'm going to think in the rule of thirds, and I've seen that I'm going to look at this, and I'm not going to measure this out exactly, but I'm going to say, here's a 1/3 line. Here's a 1/3 line. And you're just guessing at it. This isn't math class. This is art. All right? But I think that's pretty close to the 1/3. And when I look at my drawing, I can see that this teapot is pretty much right down the middle of the 1/3 line, and so is this cup. So now I just have to figure out how is it that I'm going to put this cup on here. And I'm just going to draw it really, really simply, just drawing the, just drawing the outside of it, keeping the drawing nice and loose. All right, I'm not spending a lot of time fixing it or editing it. I'm going to put my handle on. All right, keeping it on here nice and loosely. I'm going to make this bend in a little bit more there, but just a nice loose cup. And then I know my teapot basically comes right down the center of this, and my teapot almost touches this cup. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to fix some of this right on the page as I'm doing it. All right, we have this, and we have a lid, and the lid has a ball, and then there's a handle here, and there's a spout. All right, that's it. And then the plate. And we know the plate kind of comes around like this. All right, that's it. And then we're going to have a table in the background here. And I think my table is going to be right around where my 1/3 line is. All right, so now here's something that I don't say very often. Go get your eraser and erase off the 1/3 lines. All right, let's do that now. So here's my eraser. I'm just going to take off all these 1/3 lines. And don't worry about erasing the drawing that was in there, because most of it is going to go anyways. All right, take this 1/3 line off across this teapot. And I'm going to move this handle a little bit. Again, this is something that you're not going to see Rod Bergeron do very often, but I'm going to move this handle up a little bit. And again, I'm still editing, so, all right, there we go. This doesn't need to be on here across the cup either. And I'm going to take off some of these lines that I doubled up or that I decided to change, and just keep some real loose lines on here. There we go. Now, let's look at the original picture again. So you'll see this is a blue teapot on a white plate beside a white cup. My question is there any reason why you have to paint it exactly the way that it exists? I think the answer should be no. I think the answer should be just because it's white on white and a blue teapot on a white plate, there's no reason that you have to keep it that way. And we're not going to keep it that way. We're going to change pretty much everything about this. All right. So now that I have my drawing, I have my thumbnail sketch transferred onto my page, I'm going to put my sketchbook away because I no longer need that. All right, I'm going to set it aside. So what I want you to do now is get your paints out. All right, get your watercolor, get yourself some clean water. I'm going to use my just my normal regular watercolor set with a 1/2 inch flat brush, and I have a container of some fresh water. All right, I'm going to set this just over to the side here, and hopefully we'll keep all that in the frame. All right, so we're not going to keep any of this the same as the original picture. We're going to change everything about this. But really, I'm going to just use primary colors in this. So I'm going to keep the teapot blue. I'm going to make the cup yellow, and I'm going to make the plate red. All right, and I see a couple of things on here that I'm not happy with. Before I start, the shape of this plate, I'm not too happy with. I really want the plate to come out both sides fairly even. All right, like that. And I think my pencil lines for my handle are too dark. They're going to show up too much on the, they're going to show up way too much in the final painting, and I'm not happy with that, so I'm just going to do that. All right, so first thing we're going to do, make sure all of your eraser lines are off. There's another one that needs to go. All right, I'm probably shaking the camera all over the place, but you get the idea. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to paint in our background, the whole background in here, around the cup, everything. All right, we're going to do it all with our flat brush. We're going to take our flat brush and we're going to wet this whole area. All right, get lots of water, fresh clean water if you have it. All right, and we're not wetting the teapot, we're not wetting anything. We're just going to wet, I shouldn't say we're not going to wet anything. We're going to wet everything except for the items. So we're going to wet that whole background. I like using the flat brush. Some people find it's not, they don't have enough control to get into those smaller areas. All right, wet the whole thing. All right, you can pause the, you can certainly pause your, pause the video while you're doing this, and just make sure you have everything wet that you want to get wet. All right, so I want this to be wet in here. I only want this to be wet. I only want this to be wet down as far as the table, so which is going to go right across here. So I'm going to dry that up a little bit with my tissue. And if you have a tissue handy, it's really simple and easy to dry stuff up. All right, so that's it. That's, I think, everything that I want to get wet. My light is probably drying this up pretty much, but we're going to get, make sure everything's wet that you want to be wet. Grab your palette and mix up some blue. This is a ultramarine blue that I have here. It's color that I have left over from another painting that I was doing, but I'm going to just wet that. Pick up a little bit more fresh pigment. All right, put the pigment in here. This is a slightly different blue. Put this into this, mix it up. You know, I don't really like to mix colors up really well, so don't be surprised if You see me only sort of half mixing up colors. All right, there we go. Drop my tissue. Keep putting that in there. All right, and then down, we're gonna put a little bit of blue down the side here. Be careful to not wet anything that you don't want wet. There's a little spot here, a little spot in here between these two objects. We're gonna make sure that's all wet. Make sure that's all wet. We're going to go right across here. We're going to wet the whole thing with the blue watercolor. All right, so the page was already wet, so those of you that have watched videos of mine in the past, you'll know that this is wet on wet. All right, and it's sort of a favorite technique of most watercolor painters. Make sure you're up fairly close to the object. Everything is wet, all right? And then just set your brush down. And then we're just gonna give this a little tip. We're gonna drive all the paint over to the other side. Make sure everything gets the blue on it that we want blue. Drive our color back over to the other side. Put it up to the top. And there you go. So we're getting a background that is got a lot of variation to it, which is how backgrounds should be. Backgrounds should not be sort of one monochromatic color. They should have a little bit of variation to them. You'll see I have a couple of places here where it's not quite as wet as I want it to be. So I'm just going to wet those a little bit more. I'm going to chase some of this paint back down to this side. I swear to you, 50% of my painting is just moving, just turning the page to get the color to go in the direction that I want it to go in. That's about it. So for right now, I really don't want you to do any more than just that. I want you to just leave it like that. You can move the paint around to wherever it is that you want it to go, and then just set this down, take your hair dryer to it and dry it up really well. Okay, but don't start drying it until you get the paint to where it is that you want to be. Okay, so I spent about 5 minutes with my hair dryer, and this is completely dry now. It's not wet at all. But what you'll see here in the background is there's a great deal of variation. Where the paint dried quickly is very light, and where the paint took a while to dry and where it puddled, you have some great dark areas. And so just using that one color, moving it around, letting it go to wherever it is that I want it to go to, and then drying it has really made it so that I have a very mottled background. And that's what I'm going for. I don't go for, you know, pretty, completely sustained, one color background. That's not what I'm going for. So you'll see I have some white on the page. I'll have some very light areas and I have some very dark areas. I'm going for a painting that is, you know, watercolor painting should be very ghost-like. It should be so that the color is not, it's not very, very dark. It sort of has a muddied, mottled tone to it. That's very ghost-like. Okay, so we're gonna move on now. We're gonna do some other parts to this. I think I'm gonna make this cup yellow, all right? So what I'm going to do to make that cup yellow is I'm going to go to my paint set here. And this is something that you don't see me do very often, but I'm going to clean this out. Actually, it just struck me in that perhaps instead of cleaning it out, I'm going to make some yellow. I'm going to put some I'm going to put some clear water into this where this blue still is. And I'm going to mix up some yellow. And I'm going to put this yellow into this blue, and we're going to get a green. And I'm not going to mix it up a lot. I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to use this for my table. So I'm going to put this in. So this is wet on dry, all right? Not mixing it up a lot. Figuring out where it is I want this table to be in my painting. Putting it onto the page the page is dry, and my brush has got some very wet paint on it. You'll see this is a little bit bluer than the other paint was. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more yellow, put some yellow into this, put some yellow onto this, and that's going to turn green for me. Remember, blue plus yellow is going to make green. That's the color theory. So go, if you don't recall that, or if you want a refresher on it, go back and check out my other video about color mixing. All right, so there we go. So that's going to give us some very mottled, and by mottled I mean not clearly, concisely one color. All right, I'm going to put some more paint into this, right, like that. And we're going to let this run together. The other thing I'm going to do here right now is, this isn't as blue as I need this to be for the background. So I'm just going to take my wet brush. I'm going to pick up a little bit of this blue that was on there, and I'm just going to touch that into this. And hopefully that'll blend together a little bit. And there we go. That's not too bad. I'm going to take a little bit of this out up here, so I'm just going to touch it with my tissue and suck a little bit of that blue paint right off there. All right, so now it matches pretty good. And I have a little bit of a white space over here, which is not something I was going for. All right, there we go. All right, so because I want this to stay green, I'm going to take my hairdryer again, and I'm just going to dry this really, really well. All right. But I don't have to do that if I'm going to work on my teapot. And I think I am going to work on my teapot. And what I'm going to do to this teapot is I'm just going to make it another color. I'm not going to make it green, and I'm not going to make it blue. The teapot does not touch the green except for here and here, and I'm going to be careful around there to try to not get the colors to blend one into the other. But I think I'm going to make this teapot red. So now I need to clean my palette off. So where I had this blue, I'm just going to take a tissue, and you'll see just one end of it sucks that blue right out of there. All right, I'm going to put a little bit of water onto my palette. All right, 4 or 5 brushes full. Again, I'm using a 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm going to pick up some of this crimson red. I'm going to mix it up fairly thick here. I'm going to take it out of here and put it into my palette. I want a fairly saturated red. So saturation refers to the amount of pigment in the amount of water. So I'm going to put a lot of pigment into this water. All right, I'm going to make it fairly thick and fairly dark. Again, just using my flat brush, I'm going to do this side, which is the largest side. I'm going to make a swoop across here, and then I'm going to go straight down the side of my teapot. And I'm going to do that all the way across until I get to the bottom. And then I'm going to go across where the bottom of the teapot is. I'm going to wet my paintbrush again and pull it up along the side like that. All right. Now I'm going to go across this back side, top to the bottom, one single stroke. And then I want to make this curved a little bit on the bottom. So I'm just going to put one stroke on that. My handle, I'm going to take the tip, so I got quite a bit of paint on this. I'm going to take the tip of this and just draw it along the handle, where the handle is. I'm going to make that a little bit darker, so I'm going to pick up some more pigment and just put some more pigment into that. Be really patient here, okay? You're trying to pick up pigment and put it into a very, very small area. Just use the tip of the brush, all right? Don't overload it, or you're going to get it running off into that blue like I have right there. So I'm just going to take the tip of my tissue, roll it into a fairly tight point, and I'm just going to touch that on there. and take that little bit of pigment right off. All right. All right, and then across the top here, of course, I'm just going to put in some pigment like this across here, a little bit for where that is there, and then just my spout. And I'm just going to put in a little bit of color like that, and I'm going to make this somewhat darker over here where this spout is. So I'm going to pick up my paint right out of my color, and I'm just going to test this on the side, and you see how much darker that is, right? It's a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to put that into this and give this a test here. That's sort of what it is that I'm going for. It's slightly wetter. Again, be very careful there. I'm going to put a little bit more of that darker pigment in where my handle was, and maybe slightly across the bottom here. I'm going to just tap my paint off here like this and let that run a little bit. Maybe a little bit more down the side here. All right. And that's sort of the model, you know, muddled up kind of look that I'm going for that. So I have here some contrasting colors. So I have red contrast with green really, really well. All right. And I have a blue background. So you could put orange into this, and the orange would contrast really well with the blue background. I think that's a little too contrived, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make this cup here, though, this, which is sienna. All right. So I'm going to take my tissue, and I'm going to take my red off my palette, put a little bit of water on here again. You see I'm just using the same water over and over again. Put a little bit of water onto here. Take some of this sienna, mix it up fairly concentrated, put it into our water over here. All right, mix it up really good. You don't hear me say that very often either. And now I'm just going to take, again, I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to do around here. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit more of the concentrated paint, put it into our water. And then I'm just going to go across here, down the area that the cup is, down the area that the cup is. You'll notice I'm leaving in my pencil lines. I like the pencil lines in my paintings. I very often leave them in. And then just be careful with the handle here. Use the tip of the paintbrush. Add some more color into this. All right. Again, this is sort of an orangey kind of a color. It's a very goldeny, very, very golden yellow. This is sienna. We're going to let that, I'm going to leave that white space along there, but I am going to put a little bit more pigment into this. All right, like this. All right, now we have this plate to deal with on the bottom here, and my red is not quite dry there, and my green is not quite dry there. So before I go and try to paint in this plate, I'm going to put my hair dryer onto this and give this a bit of a dry. All right, so get your hair dryer out and set it on here and let it go for a couple of minutes. Okay, so I spent about 5 minutes with my hair dryer and I got it very, very dry. I took a little bit of paint off here because it was sort of starting to blend into the blue a little bit, but I like how it's lightened that up a little bit. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to take some a little bit of water on it. I'm just going to wet some area around the bottom of my cup and the bottom of this handle. I'm going to pick up a little bit of this paint that I still have left here, this sienna, and I'm just going to put that into this. And yeah, I'm just going to make this a little bit darker for a couple of reasons. One is the bottom of the cup is a little bit darker, And the other reason is that I had this paint left over and I hate to waste paint. So I'm gonna put some of that in there, like this. All right, that's sort of what it is that I'm going for. So once you get to the point where you think you have it where it is that you want it, stop adding stuff to it, all right? So the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tissue and I'm going to clean this sienna out. I'm going to take a little bit of water, put my water back into my palette here, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of blue. I think I've decided that I want this plate to be blue. So I'm going to wet my brush, my 1/2 inch watercolor brush, my 1/2 inch flat watercolor brush, and I'm just going to go around there, wet the area that I want this, where I want this plate to be blue. Don't be too careful about it. It's okay if it goes into that green tablecloth a little bit, right? Pick up a little bit more water, put a little bit more water into it, and then I'm going to pick up this blue. Oh, you see I just had a bit of an accident there. Just going to pick that up off my page. There we go. I'm going to pick up this blue and I'm going to put it into my water here. Mix it up fairly concentrated. Because it's we're making it fairly concentrated because I already have this wet, right? So we're going to put this fairly concentrated blue into this wet area like this. Don't use too much, you'll get it to flood out of the area that you have wet. All right, like this. And that's about it. I'm gonna leave it like that and see how this dries, right? You can see this blue paint is sort of flooding into that area there. And we got a little bit that's sort of coming out of where it was that I wanted it to be. So I'm just gonna dry it up a little bit. All right. All right, well, thanks for following along. I hope you learned something from this process. I hope you were able to stop the video and do what it is that you need to do and have a look at, you know, just a real simple process on doing a still life. All right, so I got that all dried up and I'm kind of happy with the way that it turned out. It's a real simple, easy still life. I hope you give it a shot. Here's what it's going to look like matted. I'm not going to frame this or anything, but it's nice to put a mat on it and see what it looks like. All right, that's it. So I hope if you learned anything from this video, you click like, and I hope if you're not currently a subscriber, you click subscribe. Thanks a lot for joining me, and I'll see you again next time.